Welcome to the News Roundup for Friday, December 19, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Federal authorities claiming the massive industrial-scale fraud in Minnesota could eventually top $9 billion after charging a number of new defendants for their role in the staggering crimes. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar defending her introduction of the pandemic-era food assistance program, which is directly tied to her state's enormous fraud schemes, claiming that at least it fed hungry kids. And the Trump administration accusing a Democratic-led Virginia county of having blood on their hands after their sanctuary policies allowed a violent illegal immigrant to get out of jail and allegedly commit murder. Also, the Chinese parent company of the social media app TikTok finally agrees to sell their U.S. operations to a group of well-known American investors. And a brave soldier with bone cancer is all smiles after his remarkable reunion with a stray puppy he bonded with while he was deployed in the Middle East. All this and a bunch more is coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with this. If Governor Tim Walz thinks his ballooning Minnesota fraud scandal is going away anytime soon, he better think again. We are on the case here in the Roundup Studios. Federal authorities now saying that the scope of the growing crisis goes way beyond what was previously imagined, and that when all is said and done, the cost for the fraud damage could eventually cost taxpayers more than $9 billion. The U.S. attorney in charge of prosecuting those fraud schemes now says that the magnitude of the crimes cannot be overstated and that what's going on is taking place at an industrial scale. He says so far, fraud has been discovered in more than a dozen different programs, that the total cost of all those programs combined, get this, tops $18 billion, and he believes that at the end of the day, more than half of those payments, they may be fraudulent. Goes on to say that during their investigations, officials are now discovering that many companies aren't merely overbilling Medicaid, they're basically providing no services at all. Says fraudsters are basically creating fake shell companies, submitting false claims, and then spending the free cash on international travel and jet-set lifestyles. Additionally, he claims that Minnesota has now become such a magnet for grift that it's actually developed its own fraud tourism industry with people pouring into the state from all over the country, all in order to take part in the schemes and get their hands on all that easy money. Officials say they're just getting started when it comes to investigating and holding people accountable for the scams. They say federal agents, including the FBI, currently in the process of executing a number of new search warrants and looking into a variety of different state programs and home health organizations. They also say that every day they look under a rock, they find new $50 million fraud schemes. In the meantime, authorities, they keep charging a bunch of new defendants in their alleged roles for the fraud. And right now, there are so many different types of scams, they're even giving them their own names. Among them, the autism fraud scheme, the housing services fraud scheme, the assisted living fraud scheme, and you kind of get the point. Just goes on and on. And since we're not hearing much these days from Governor Tim Walz, maybe he'd like to chip in and name a few of them for himself. In fact, right now, here's the hotline. 2 people in the world have the number to this hotline, 47. President Donald J. Trump and Governor Walz. He has the hotline number as well. Governor Walz, you've got a free form right here. Check in anytime. We'll get you on the air. No questions asked. Speak your mind, state your case. And speaking of the governor, for his part, Walz has already temporarily suspended a number of those questionable Medicaid programs. And he says that moving forward, fraud will not be tolerated in his state at all. Go get him, Tiger. He also says he plans to continue working diligently alongside his federal partners in order to catch all the bad guys, hold them accountable for their crimes, and finally bring out-of-control fraud in Minnesota to an end. He's on top of his game. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. In everything we do in life, there is in place a system of checks and balances. If a traffic cop pulls you over, he or she has a body cam to record the event and all interactions. And that way, everyone is held accountable. Also, at my bank, there are more cameras in that one-story building than you'll find at any movie studio anywhere on the planet. Nobody gets away with anything. In Minnesota, however, it's beginning to feel like everybody is left to their own devices to work on their own and do whatever they want with absolutely no oversight. There's no cameras allowed in Minnesota. Hey, look, at the end of the day, somebody's got to be the grown-up in the room and say the buck stops here. And that someone is the state's chief executive officer. In other words, the governor. Now, because I'm kind of new to politics, I'm going to have to phone a friend to find out who the governor is. Hey, Producer Davey, a little help. Who's that CEO governor guy in charge in Minnesota? What's his name?
Are you talking about Governor Tim Walz, Bill?
That's the one, Tim Walz. So here's the deal. Somebody dropped the ball. A number of folks made bank. Others got caught and are behind bars. And taxpayers, they're left footing the bill. Now, look, it's Friday, so we have to end this story on a bit of a happy note. You'll be delighted to hear that the guy charged with overseeing the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz, he is living right now in a mansion, rent-free, with a six-figure salary and tons of perks. I just adore happy news. And now this brief news roundup advertisement. Producer Davis, our first advertisement. When visiting Minnesota, please visit Walsneyland and take a ride on the roller coaster of fraud, daredevil deception, and the now world-famous I Know Nothing merry-go-round. It just goes round and round and round, and nobody ever has any answers. Nobody knows what's going on. Producer Davey, that's it. The commercial is over. And any thoughts on Minnesota mayhem? What's on your mind?
Yeah, Bill. Well, unfortunately, I don't think these types of scams are limited just to Minnesota.
Yeah.
You know, they're probably taking place all over the country, but apparently it's so easy to get away with in Minnesota that people are flocking there just for the opportunity.
Yeah, that is the place. Folks have been checking in as well, leaving comments for us right here, saying there's a lot of this happening in Ohio, also in Maine, Oregon, and pretty much all over the country. We need to watch things very carefully. And the way I see it, all Minnesotans right now, they should kind of band together, start maybe one of those big, giant, goofy petitions, and demand new state leadership on account of right now, you may not know it, but you're getting gypped. And on that note, if you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button right over there. And you're always welcome as well to leave your thoughts and your comments. Always love to hear from you and scooting right along. Going to stay on topic now just a bit longer and turn our attention to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's role in the massive Minnesota fraud scandal. In case you're not already aware, Omar sponsored the bill in which Congress initially created the Federal Meals Act program that's directly linked to her state's enormous Feeding Our Future welfare scheme. It's a big deal. Now, despite that program costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars in wasted money, she's standing firmly behind her legislation, claiming that it didn't lead to any type of fraud at all. And you got to wonder what planet she is living on. Omar now says she has no regrets at all for pushing the measure on Capitol Hill, that it has nothing to do whatsoever with what's going on in her state, and that on the contrary. She says it actually helped feed a bunch of needy school children. However, when you take a bit of a closer look, and I know you have, her statement really doesn't quite add up. The Congresswoman's bill, introduced right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was designed to modify the federal government's food and nutrition programs to allow certain waivers regarding school meals during that critical time. You know, since then, her home state, community, and district have all become ground zero for taking advantage of that measure, ultimately resulting in our nation's single largest COVID-era fraud scheme. The scam took advantage of a temporary loophole which allowed a bunch of non-school-based food distributors to take part in the federal nutrition program during the pandemic, and fraudsters would then go on to create false records and then bill the state for millions of meals which they never served. In my mind, that is pure evil. Since come to light that many of the accused have direct ties to Omar's local Somali community, including many defendants with personal links to the Congresswoman herself. And you can decide for yourself if you think that's worth noting. Me? I say it's worth noting, worth pointing out. In the meantime, one Florida lawmaker now weighing a move to actually bring Omar before Congress and force a vote permanently to remove her from the House of Representatives. That move coming in direct response to the Congresswoman's call for the Florida rep to be expelled himself. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Now, if you think Minnesotans are the only ones left to foot the bill for that legendary amount of fraud, you'd do well to kind of ponder this. Think about this. A large amount of pilfered dough in that state came from federal funds, which are amassed through taxation. And if you're like me, you pay taxes. Therefore, we are, all of us nationwide, you and I, we're on the hook for that monumental disaster. This really amounts to grand theft on a mammoth scale. And because Minnesota leadership has proven they're incapable of fixing their own mess, the Trump administration stepping up, moving in, and trying to TCB, take care of business. And by the way, be careful of the bait and switch on this story. You'll hear about it. Governor Timbo, he's making goofy claims about the president going after the Somali community. Well, that right there is a false narrative. He doesn't care about anyone's ethnicity. Rather, he simply wants to get to the bottom of the big caper, hold those responsible for it accountable, and prevent it from happening again. Good try, though, Tim. And for her part, Ilhan Omar, the one in charge of that state's 5th district, coming off as kind of delusional. Instead of talking about the real issue, fraud, on a tragic level, she's now claiming that 47 is obsessed with her and that he's creepy. And that's called deflection strike 1. She claims that her son was recently pulled over by ICE agents. We talked about that yesterday. ICE said never happened. And again, that's deflection strike 2. And attacking the Trump administration for their drug enforcement efforts. Deflection strike 3. And producer Davey, if this were a baseball game, I think that's called 3 strikes and you're out. Chime in, sir.
Well, Bill, you got that part right. In baseball, if you get 3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah, it's kind of easy to read. If you just look at her and listen to her, very easy to read. Easier to read than the National Enquirer, but not as much fun and certainly not as factual as the Enquirer. She's trying desperately to change the topic, but nobody's buying it. We're all on to the big scam. Try a little harder next time, Miss Omar. Turning now to a troubling story concerning the fight against illegal immigration, the potentially harmful policies of sanctuary cities, and the dangerous consequences of prioritizing politics over safety. The Trump administration now says that Democratic politicians in Northern Virginia, they've got blood on their hands after local police freed an illegal immigrant with a lengthy rap sheet, only to have the criminal allegedly gunned down and kill a man the very next day. You should be up in arms about this. Pay attention. This is just a vicious story. Officials say the 23-year-old suspect from El Salvador has been living in our country and illegally and had been in police custody on a number of very serious charges, including brandishing a firearm. However, they say police were forced to free him after those charges were dropped by the local progressive county attorney. And within hours of gaining his freedom, the suspect would go on to allegedly commit a deadly crime. According to court records, when he allegedly shot his latest victim, the suspect had already been charged with at least 7 crimes in Fairfax County. Additionally, he was also suspected of being a card-carrying member of the violent MS-13 gang. County attorney defending his actions, how do you do that? Saying that he released the illegal immigrant because he simply didn't have enough evidence to keep him behind bars. Well, that doesn't make any sense to you. It doesn't make any sense to me either. And meanwhile, the local sheriff's office says they've notified ICE that they have the suspect in custody and that ultimately the Immigration Enforcement Agency chose not to pursue the required warrant, which was necessary to keep him behind bars. The Department of Homeland Security, they're weighing in as well. They say the entire situation merely an example of sanctuary politicians passing the buck, playing the blame game, and jeopardizing American lives by releasing illegal alien criminals back onto our city streets. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. There's something desperately wrong in our country right now. An illegal immigrant, initial violation, who's already been charged with a number of additional crimes and who's suspected of being a member of a violent gang, already behind bars and somehow is released. How could anybody ever sign off on that? That he's now a suspect in a murder case should come as no surprise. And in my estimation, this person is a prime candidate for deportation, and certainly he should be locked up for a good chunk of time. There's also this, that Fairfax County is attempting to levy any of the blame on ICE is inexcusable. And we did some research, did some digging, and take a look at what we found here. We just found this out just moments ago. Earlier this year, Virginia's Fairfax County ranked 3rd on a new list of sanctuary jurisdictions, with the county jail having refused to cooperate on more than 1,150 deportation detainer requests that came from the Department of Homeland Security, and that's been going on for the past 2.5 years. Now, look, sanctuary communities are not serving their citizens. Rather, they're enabling lawbreakers and putting at risk law-abiding citizens, folks like you and I, and not only in Fairfax County, but in fact all over the country. Now, this one concerns you, and I think it should. Tell us what you're thinking and leave a note for us right here in the comments section. We always enjoy hearing from you, and the story has got a lot of people very concerned. All right, moving along now to breaking developments concerning one of the most popular social media apps in the entire world. After a long and protracted battle, Chinese company ByteDance now agreeing to sell control of their U.S. TikTok operations. They'll sell that to a well-funded American investment group, which includes tech giant Oracle. And no price tag has yet been announced. The deal is estimated to be worth, though, we hear, about $10 billion, give or take a couple of billion. The move finally puts to rest the possibility that the popular app would be permanently banned here in the States due to a number of pressing national security concerns. It's all over the company's relationship to those guys, the Chinese Communist Party, and it's no party. So, President Trump and a number of other high-ranking officials have been extremely worried that TikTok's parent company could be legally obligated to turn over the personal data of nearly 170 million American users to the communist regime. And that's why folks like you and I, at least me, I don't use TikTok. I hope you don't either. And for now, at least those worries have temporarily been put to rest with the new deal allowing American investors to oversee data security, content, and all the rest. Now, some additional headlines we are keeping a close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first, the man suspected in the recent deadly shootings at both Brown University and MIT. He has been found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound at a storage facility in New Hampshire. A county judge in Wisconsin has been found guilty of obstruction after she was accused of helping a Mexican immigrant get away from federal authorities. And in the world of politics, we can't leave out this one. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, predicting she would stomp all over Vice President J.D. Vance if the two wind up going head-to-head in the 2028 presidential election. I don't see it panning out that way, but good for her. In the meantime, Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica, now says she'll be backing Vance in 28. But hold your horses. It's not clear yet whether or not 47 plans to run for a third term. Once again, 47, President Trump, there's the hotline. Ring through anytime and tell us what your plans are. Now, a quick gander at a bit of rock and roll showbiz news, and we kick things off with a bittersweet memory for a Hollywood legend. We all love this guy. On-screen tough guy, Sly Stallone, now says that moments after his breakout movie, Rocky, won the Oscar for Best Picture, that was back in 1977, he says he was overwhelmed with a bout of sadness simply because his parents weren't there in the audience to share the experience. He says his loved ones simply didn't want to be there with him and that he carries that wound around with him to this very day. That really is kind of a kick in the head. You write and you star in this big boxing movie, you score a bunch of Oscar nominations, and mom and dad, they don't show up. Like Ricky Nelson said all them years ago, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. And by the way, I hope editor Pranav the Magnificent can show us an Apollo rocket right over here, because producer Davey, as you look at the Apollo rocket, didn't Rocky fight one of the Apollo astronauts in that movie?
No, Bill. He fought Apollo Creed in that movie.
And he won?
Well, no. Actually, Rocky lost the fight, Bill.
Oh, well, that's why I always say never get into a fight in a movie with an Apollo astronaut. NASA-trained guys, they are tough dudes. Moving along now to another Hollywood heartthrob. That guy right there is Ethan Hawke, who, as it turns out, just an ordinary fella like you and I. And in a recent interview with his longtime pal Gwyneth Paltrow, Hawke admits that he's a lifelong fan of Taco Bell. We're all fans of the Bell. The 55-year-old movie star says that to this very day, he makes a run for the border whenever he wants to celebrate a significant milestone, such as landing a big role or finishing a difficult project. It's good to know that even though he's rich and famous and a big-time Hollywood star, he still knows what's what and where to find the good eats. You can have your fancy 5-star restaurants like Denny's and Applebee's, but the smart money will always be on Taco Bell. And by the way, they need to bring back that enchilada. They get the best menu items and then they ditch them for some reason. Oh, and I almost forgot, Ethan Hawke was great in that movie, Training Day. If we have a shot of that, Training Day with Denzel Washington. That was nearly a quarter of a century ago. And finally, a 20-year-old U.S. Army veteran who unexpectedly developed bone cancer in his knee is no longer fighting that battle on his own after reuniting with a stray puppy. He found a stray puppy, that is, he found earlier this year while he was deployed overseas, thanks to a nonprofit group called Paws of War. The brave soldier and his faithful companion reconnecting at a welcome reunion, which was overwhelmingly emotional for everyone involved. By the way, that's the best way to wrap up the week. A little story about a couple of rock stars. A guy in the Army befriends a little pooch, and the pooch is now coming to his rescue as he bravely fights his battle with cancer. A couple of rock stars who both have each other's back. Davey, do I hear you crying? Is that a tear coming down right now?
Well, Bill, anybody with a heart is going to shed a little tear for that story.
You've got a heart. I like that. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the Friday edition of the Big News Roundup. And before we go, as we do each and every day right here on this program, we share with you a very notable quote. And these profound words come to us today from William Jefferson Clinton, who said, "There's nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured with what is right in America." what is right in America. I assume he was talking about the GOP because when he left office, Davey, I think George W. Bush took over. I'm just thinking out loud. Bill Clinton, by the way, he was an American politician who served as our nation's president 1993 through 2001. And it was on this date back in 1998. He was impeached for perjury and obstruction of justice by the U.S. House of Representatives. And with that, time's just about up, so have an awesome day. Enjoy your weekend as well. Please stay safe. And if you haven't done so already, we'd like to remind you from time to time, you got to hit that subscribe button right over there. Now we're going to dim the lights. We're going to fade to black, and we'll see you right back here on Monday for our brand new edition of the Big News Roundup.